with a coalition of folks, including the Lawyers Guild, including Center for Constitutional Rights and others. And I hope this is instructive for younger people. The purpose of a lawsuit is multifaceted. It is not always to go into court and get the court to say, you're right, they're wrong. Okay? That's one purpose of it. We undertook the initial litigation with the idea of highlighting the hypocrisy and inconsistencies of the law, and to keep that lawsuit alive as long as we could until folks could get organized, because there were folks organized, and they were planning a petition drive. But every day that went by, the more emergency manager would be accepted. So the idea of that lawsuit was to get into court, to let folks know that it's being challenged, let the media know that it's being challenged, while the petition drive and other things got organized. That suit ultimately was dismissed after about 1.5 years, and it was an incredibly, to me, successful suit. Because while the lawsuit was pending, and while we got media putting that out there, that there were people resisting emergency management, the petition drive was collecting signatures and gearing up to have a vote to repeal that law. We were, between everyone in the room, we did not want the Michigan Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court deciding that case. The goal was to get a decent decision at the trial court if we could, but to keep the case going along while those petitioners got geared up. And that's what occurred. And then there was a successful petition drive, incredibly grassroots, incredibly from the law, that repealed the initial law. Well, we're fighting a system that no one of us individually can defeat, and collectively it is a challenge at this point to defeat as well. And the corrupt legislature immediately went in and passed a new one. Now, if our judicial system was functioning properly, that would have been declared illegal very quickly. It does not take a legal scholar to figure out that just shouldn't be. But
don't drop your voice.
So the ultimate, we then moved to a federal court challenge on the new law. Reason for that is because we got better courts in the federal courts. But again, we recognize some very real problems with that. This is completely untested waters. For those of you, who just listen to the media, emergency manager laws are about solving the municipal financial emergencies that are plaguing our state and have plagued municipalities around the country since the Great Recession, which we're not fully out of, that we're eking away out of. And it's a real eke. So Michigan decided, what are we going to do about it? Let's pass this law. It is not about corrupt municipalities at all. That's part of the logic or the rationalization or the propaganda that you've been fed about why the law is needed. Because municipalities such as Detroit, through Kwame Kilpatrick, were corrupt or they're incompetent. These are bigotries and biases that have been labeled against poor folks since the dawn of time. It took this country 100 years to get rid of all the legal restrictions on poor people being able to vote. You used to have to pay poll taxes. You used to have to pay own property in certain states. In local elections, you had to have a certain amount of wealth because you were invested in the community if you did. It took us about 100 years to kill those ideas. Now we're doing it in a backdoor way. We're saying that in these communities, people don't vote for responsible government officials who will balance the books and make the tough decisions to balance the books. I assume, when I get talking about this, I assume everybody knows what emergency management does. But for those of you who don't, in a nutshell, it removes all the power of elected officials and one person starts to make the decisions. including passing all local laws, that one person is unelected and unaccountable to the people governed. There was no avenue for the people governed to remove or replace them. None whatsoever. They pass laws from their desk. They write local ordinances and amend charters. And it has been done since the first law has been passed. When I say the law is not about solving finances, New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, dozens of other cities faced financial crises as big or bigger, much bigger than Detroit's in many instances, much bigger than Benton Harbor's, much bigger than Flint's and Pontiac's. And that's been going on since the first Great Depression in the 1930s. One avenue for solving those problems is Chapter 9. Generally, the threat of Chapter 9 for local officials is enough, because when the local officials can say to the creditor, let's negotiate or else we're filing, the creditors will negotiate. In Michigan, we had a governor who said, we will not use Chapter 9 for any city. Detroit will not go into Chapter 9 bankruptcy. At the time, he was negotiating with Kevin Bohr to become the emergency manager. Kevin Bohr is a bankruptcy attorney. It was planned for them to be taken into bankruptcy. Well, if they were going into bankruptcy, why didn't he allow the elected officials to do it? I strongly believe because it is about a certain economic program. Elected officials are still accountable to people. As much as we can be disenchanted with our elected system, ultimately they still can be accountable to the people in some respects. An emergency manager is not. And there is a certain economic program that emergency manager is about in every single city that it has been put into place. That is mass privatization. Privatization of everything you can. What is privatization? It is the transfer of public wealth to private entities. You cannot escape that fact. The E-Course, there's Louis Schimmel, who is the first emergency manager and one of its strongest proponent, a Mackinac Center true believer, said in E-Course, when the E-Course went through sort of the precursor to emergency manager, which is emergency financial management and receivership. 1976, he had been appointed over E-Course in about 1990s or so. I privatized everything in sight, all the city services, and that's how we balanced our budget. In about 2003, E-Course was back into a bankruptcy situation. They got an emergency financial manager. Now that's after his first round of privatization. I don't know what's still left in E-Course because it's gone through an emergency financial manager, then an emergency manager. The city's problems are more fundamental. They are about revenue as much as anything. When you have the highest concentrations of the unemployed in one place, which was intentional as well, and the poorest folks in one place, with the most broken educational systems, and then say to yourself, solve your problems, it doesn't tend to work. That's not just in the United States, that's in pretty much everywhere in the world. It is designed to fail. I'll give you one example of the privatization that has gone on. Alice and other folks are going to talk about the water department issues, which I think are intimately related to intentions to privatize. Pontiac has an emergency manager, had one now, it's in a transition advisory board, which is another form of emergency manager, although it's emergency manager. I believe it had about 500 employees that were not in the city clerk's office and not associated with the court system, and emergency manager said they got down to 20. Why does that matter? For pretty much every community, or a significant part of getting out of poverty has been in part through assistance of having public employment and having public unions and having private unions. I know my own family, going back its history, when you look into your family's history, it saved us in the Great Depression when my grandfather got a rural route post job, which was part of the Works project that Franklin Roosevelt was doing. At the time, they gave them a very tiny amount of money. They had to pay their own gas, these post people. But they made enough to live on and to keep from moving into Hoovervilles, basically by selling the stamps to local customers. When we kill public service, it built the middle class of many of our urban cities. It's when our cops and firemen and the waves of immigrant groups came through. Today and always, you can't separate race from class in our country, and you cannot escape the fact that the emergency manager law is applied overwhelmingly in black cities. I truly believe that that's what allows it to pass muster. Because the silent folks out there who wouldn't allow it in their community don't look close enough and accept embedded, bigoted messages along the lines of the city's run by corrupt officials, cities are run by incompetent officials. No shortage of corruption or incompetence in Flint or Detroit. There's no shortage of corruption and incompetence in Warren either. There really isn't. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. It's a predominantly white city. It's as corrupt as the day is long. And we're very proud of that word. But nobody's putting an emergency manager there. Interesting, Rhode Island has as bad a municipal finance problem as Michigan, and probably worse. In any event, I think I should end because I'm not sure of the time, but I think I've probably run to 10 minutes. I could talk forever on this. Do not think it's only Michigan. Pennsylvania has now got a law that can be an emergency manager law. Indiana has adopted it, but not used it yet. And there's a couple other states. Rhode Island, one of them. Thank you.
Actually, what had happened was, I don't know, was it Sugar or somebody working with Sugar did get a state circuit court judge to declare the Emergency Manager Act to be unconstitutional in Lansing. And then as a result of that, the governor and Mr. Orr hurried up and did what they probably were going to do anyway. And I believe July of 2013, they filed the Chapter 9 case so that they could stop the judge's decision.
It's actually,
from
so
taking-
pensions. It was saying that they couldn't go after the pension, is what the upshot of it was.
Yes.
And so that's why they hurried up, because there was a judge about to issue a decision saying that under the state constitution, the pensions were not like any other contract. They were above them and they could not, essentially couldn't be much harder to touch. So they rushed to file, judge issued her decision the next day, regardless, because she said we were just trying to run her decision, but the bankruptcy court overruled.
I saw on your announcements downstairs that Judge Rhodes will be here Monday. If you have any questions about this, you might put them to him. And then, of course, the city filed the Chapter 9 case, and it involved a lot of people, so we're going to hear from somebody who's not a lawyer. We're going to hear from one of the people that was adversely affected, Miss Nicole Hill, who's one of our clients in the case. Nicole, why don't you tell them what you told Katerina de Albuquerque, the United Nations rapporteur?